Good morning, folks. It is the morning of the 28th of September. And yesterday I made a promise to those who follow me on Facebook that I would look at the underpinning psychology behind all different forms of collectivism. Before we get into that, I want to say that because of my own inadequacies, I suppose I have a deep need to try to understand things that are difficult and or unpleasant to understand, and as significantly, things that would help me to understand myself better. But one thing I do not have any desire to do is to control others. And yet here we live in this age where the controlling nature of unconstitutional government has reached a fever point. And it's driven society, particularly in the US right now, to rage. People are tearing down monuments, asking for the police to be defunded, violently protesting instead of doing so peacefully. People who seem to have no understanding whatsoever of how to live their own lives, but are completely confident that they know how others should live theirs, and moreover, that they would use the force of the state to make them do it. I fear such control, so that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about the narcissistic nature of collectivism, which seems like a contradiction in terms, because you wouldn't think that a person who was a social collectivist would be a narcissist. But let's delve into what Psychology Today and DSM-5 criteria for pathological narcissism has to say about it. So yesterday I posted this. This week I will vlog about the narcissistic nature common to all forms of collectivism. It is truly a remarkable phenomenon that rejection of individual accountability requires pathological narcissism. And other than the political elite, there is no other category of profoundly pathological narcissist than artists, which is exactly why so many of them are neo-Marxist sympathizers, something which, as someone who used to really enjoy booking music and hosting shows in pubs, I find absolutely appalling. But nevertheless, in this journey since my time in Norway and waking up to the dangers of cultural Marxism, I've become convinced, unwillingly convinced, that this is exactly the case. So here's the setup for today's vlog. In an article entitled "The Toll of Pathological Narcissism on Loved Ones," the empirical research quantifies the impact of extreme self-absorption. And this was posted August the 18th, 2019. And I'll read a quote first and then from the article. Since narcissists deep down feel themselves to be faultless, it is inevitable that when they are in conflict with the world, they will invariably perceive the conflict as the world's fault. That's a quote by M. Scott Peck. Narcissism can be healthy when it's associated with balanced self-love, security, and self-esteem. Healthy narcissism means having a great relationship with oneself and not feeling ashamed of tending to oneself in special ways. Pathological narcissism, on the other hand, causes problems. Per the DSM-5 criteria for narcissistic personality disorder is a long-standing pattern of inner experience and behavior that deviates markedly from the expectation of the individual's culture, leading to clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, All personality disorders may affect, number one, cognition, how we think and perceive ourselves, others, and the world. 2, affectivity, how we experience and process emotions. 3, interpersonal functioning, the way we think, feel, and behave in relationships. And 4, impulse control. NPD affects 0.5 to 1% of the U.S. population. The majority, between 50 and 70%, are male. And these traits include, and this is the diagnostic criteria right out of DSM-5, 301-81 bracket F60-81 bracket. I'll post all the links to this, by the way, below this video. I do not ask anyone to believe me, but when I've done research, I have consulted those who are deemed to be apparently the experts in the field of psychology. And so what I'm doing here is only quoting them. I am not a psychologist. I am not trained in psychology. I am merely observing and quoting the patterns of behavior right from DSM-5 that are indicative of a pathological narcissist. Number 1, has a grandiose sense of self-importance. Example, exaggerates achievements and talents, expect to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. Good Lord, who does that sound like? Justin, they're writing about you again. Number 2, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. There should be a picture of JT under that one. Believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions like the government. Requires excessive admiration is 4. Number 5, has a sense of entitlement, i.e. unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. 6, is interpersonally exploitive, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends. 7, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. 8, is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her. 9, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. And the source for that, again, is the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, published in Arlington, Virginia, by the American Psychiatric Association in 2013. So, grandiose versus vulnerable narcissism. Now here we get to break down narcissism in 2 important manifestations, because these 2 manifestations pretty much explain the elite class of narcissist that believes that they have the right, the duty to lord it over others, and the type of collectivist narcissist that willingly complies with arbitrary rules. The construct of pathological narcissism overlaps with NPD. 2 types of pathological narcissism are described: grandiose and vulnerable. Grandiose narcissism includes dominance, vengefulness, and a lack of regard for others' boundaries. This is why I would never wish to control another person's life. I don't want to be controlled by anyone, and neither do I wish to control others. Abiding by the law and the rules that govern polite society and the 10 Commandments should be sufficient. I don't want to be coerced into behaviors that I don't approve of. Two types of pathological narcissism are described: grandiose and vulnerable. Grandiose narcissism includes dominance, vengefulness, and a lack of regard for others' boundaries. Grandiose narcissists tend to have a thicker skin. Deep down, if others don't like them, that's okay. While vulnerable narcissism, on the other hand, hurts on the inside and is more closely related to traditional psychoanalytic models of narcissism as a covering up of deep inner insecurity, a defensive response to difficulty coping with many of life's more difficult truths. So here we see the emergence in the vulnerable narcissist of the inability to deal with reality. They can't handle the truth. Remember that old, was it a TV? So you want the truth, baby? You can't handle the truth. You know, these are the young narcissists of today, and particularly among musicians. If you say something to them based on a realistic analysis of what's going on, they're, they become a literal incarnation of that skrik, that famous Norwegian painting by that hideous artist whose name I won't mention because I can't stand his work. It's too nihilistic, and I don't like nihilism. I like to find meaning in things through the grand narrative that has made the West possible, namely, the fact that the sovereign individual is created in the image of God, accountable to Him, and that is the single underpinning, greatest foundation for Western constitutional democracy, the inherent rights of the individual and his or her liberty. So it's a cover-up for deep insecurity, defensive response to difficulty coping with any of life's more difficult truths, especially regarding one's challenge areas. Often there is a developmental trauma, leading to some to call it post-traumatic narcissism. People with a healthy sense of self tend to avoid narcissism, especially the grandiose type, while sometimes compulsive caregivers will be drawn to vulnerable narcissists who often need help but reject it. Oh, God. How does pathological narcissism affect partners and family members? The research on how pathological narcissism affects relationships is limited. Past work is with subgroups, such as college students, or looks at only one subtype, according to researchers Day, Burke, Townsend, and Brin, and their research paper, Pathological Narcissism, a study of burden on partners and family. They surveyed 683 participants who were in relationships with narcissistic folk. 62% reported being with a narcissist spouse or partner, 15% had been with them but were no longer, and 18% noted a family member, usually the mother, 46%, or a sibling, 16%, father, 10%, or child, 5%. They were compared people in relationships with close others with different conditions, including other personality disorders, such as borderline, depression, bipolar, anxiety disorders, and psychotic disorders. So, vulnerable versus grandiose, which is more harmful? This is from an article again in Psychology Today, posted June 23, 2019. Vulnerability makes people prone to hatred and outrage. That's what's driving the rioting in the streets and the tearing down of monuments and the screaming of victimhood. I've seen the meme posted often that a person born in 1900 saw the First World War. They saw the Spanish flu pandemic. They saw the Great Depression. They saw World War II. Then they saw a real good chance for global nuclear holocaust. You don't hear those people whining. I know, they raised me. They didn't complain. In fact, when I complained, my father gave me one of these on the ear and said, Why don't you shut up, boy, and listen? Let me check. You've got 3 hot meals prepared for you every day. You can set your watch by them. You have brand new clothes washed, folded, ironed, and placed in your drawer. You've never gone hungry. You sleep in a warm bed. You've never done without. What do you have to tell me? Nothing. Why don't you shut your mouth and listen? You might learn something. Now these, you see, are the valuable lessons that we learned from our parents. And he did not give a shit about my feelings. Even though I was hurt. Oh, Daddy. You know? Oh, God, help me. What are we raising today? The most self-entitled, narcissistic little shits that have ever lived on the face of this misbegotten planet. Let me go on. It just makes me so friggin' cheesed. Vulnerability makes people prone to hatred and outrage. DSM-5 defines narcissistic personality disorder as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, a need for admiration, a lack of empathy, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, indicating 5 or more of the following patterns. Grandiose sense of self-importance. We've already got into this before, but we're going into greater depth. Exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. JT couldn't even finish university or finish a job. 2, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. 3, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high-status people or institutions. Just like Trudeau has loaded his government with sycophantic toadies who kiss his hiney and agree to any ridiculous money-spending spree that will bankrupt this nation. Requires excessive admiration is 4. 5 is a sense of entitlement, unreasonable expectations, especially a favorable treatment, automatic compliance with his or her expectations. And now you see this guy willing to shut people up on Facebook so they comply. Just like that goddamn premier in Victoria, Australia, where the most arcane Byzantine lockup on the face of the planet is proceeding right now. I have family in Melbourne, and you know what's worse? They're not complaining. I can't believe they're my brother's kids. Seriously, I can't. I can't believe that people are that unaware of what should and in fact must legally happen, where you have the rule of parliamentary law, the rule of constitutionalism, the rule of English common law. There's no longer any separation of powers. The executive's messing with the judiciary all the time. It's horrendous. 6 is interpersonally exploitive, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her ends. Literally, we have a prime minister here that is taking advantage of an entire nation, but not just in the present. For this advantage that he's taking lasts not just to my children, but perhaps my children's children. And maybe even theirs, to pay off this godless, immoral debt that they're engaging in purely for social manipulation in an attempt to create utter compliance to arbitrary dictatorial rule. Lacks empathy, unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Obvious envious of others. You know who they're most envious of? They're envious of people like my brother-in-law, a self-made man, a man who built a brilliant business and became wealthy doing so through sheer hard work and investing and knowing how to create clients all over the world to buy his fine products. These people are rare. And these are the people that actually create industry. Without them, we are utterly screwed. Money will always go. Money and talent will always go where they are most welcome. And they're not welcome here in Canada now. I can assure you of that. And 9, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. Clinical narcissists display co-occurring or oscillating states of grandiosity and hypersensitivity. This is why Trudeau's gone into hiding. Because his grandiosity has led him to become hypersensitive and he goes into hiding. Can't handle the heat. No wonder. Those that love him, and those that hate him with such a flaming, almighty passion that the vitriol that drives them is palpable. I know it because it dwells in me. Accordingly, inventories used to determine pathological narcissism, like the Pathological Narcissism Inventory, encompasses hypersensitivity, vulnerability measured alongside of grandiosity. In the Pathological Narcissism Inventory, grandiosity is measured by the patient's response on a 5-point scale to questions like, I often fantasize about being recognized for my accomplishments. I often fantasize about being rewarded for my efforts, and I want to amount to something in the eyes of the world, whereas hypersensitive vulnerability is assessed by the patient's response on a 5-point scale to questions like, it is hard for me to feel good about myself unless I know other people like me. It's hard to show others the weaknesses I feel inside. And I like to have friends who rely on me because it makes me feel important. Because of the co-occurrence or oscillation of grandiosity and hypersensitivity in clinical narcissism, there are no officially recognized subtypes of clinical narcissism. Clinical narcissism is rare. It only affects about 1% of the population, and this number appears to stay fairly constant. When a flashy headline exclaims that narcissism is on the rise, the term narcissism is used to refer to the more prevalent subclinical or everyday variant of narcissism seen in the general population. Upward of 10% of people in their 20s are believed to suffer from subclinical narcissism, severe enough to compromise their interpersonal relationships, which is why you see people in this subcategory canceling their grandparents, canceling their mother or their father because they didn't agree with them, agree with their woke ideology where everyone is a victim of male patriarchy. Again, everything I'm reading to you here will be posted in the video below. I do not ask you to believe me. Look at the data yourself, look at the information yourself, and come to your own conclusions regarding what is happening today. Because we are suffering the most brutal, arcane lockdown of personal liberty and free market individual economic liberty that we have seen ever. Okay? This has never happened before to this extent, in this magnitude. It is my grave suspicion that the people, the narcissists, the grandiose narcissists behind it, were attempting to use climate hysteria to silence others, and particularly after Michael Moore released that film on the failure of green energy, they had to find some other scam to add to climate hysteria that would make people frightened enough to do what the government was asking them to do, arbitrarily asking them, in contradiction to constitutional law. So the vulnerable narcissist reflects introversion and self-absorption, high neuroticism, hypersensitivity, even to gentle criticism, and constant need for reassurance. Do you need a hug? Give me mojo lip. Okay, you better now? Bitty batty. Yeah, you're better now, just like I'm better. As Dr. Craig Malkin points out in Rethinking Narcissism, vulnerable narcissists are just as convinced that they're better than others than any other narcissist, but they fear criticism. So viscerally, they shy away from or even seem panicked by people and attention. Owing to the apparent lack of a common core between the two subtypes of narcissism, most personality researchers regard grandiose and vulnerable narcissism as independent traits. However, the fact that the two traits co-present or oscillate in narcissistic personality disorder, the clinical type, suggests that they do in fact have a common basis. So this is, and I'll leave that there in terms of reading this and talk about quite a famous artist whom I know. I won't mention the kid's name, gentleman's name, but he had seen me remonstrating with the government's overreach and asked me, what would you do if you were more free? And I'm wondering what he's doing now, this multiple award-winning artist, top awards in Canada, at the pinnacle of achievement in the music. He's, what would you do with more freedom? And I'm wondering what he's doing now that he ain't got no gigs, you know? But moreover, he said to me that the average person is so stupid that they can't really control themselves. You need the government to do that for them. First of all, that's a hideous way to view your fellow. Second of all, what makes him think he's so smart? And thirdly, what makes him think that the elected elite are clever enough to manipulate society in the grossly coercive way that they're doing so at present? We are looking at a total and utter societal collapse in terms of the foundational principles upon which Western liberal democracy is based. The freest, most democratic, most liberal, most open places on the planet under attack by these two variants of narcissist who believe that they, the clever ones, are going to manipulate you into getting you to do what they want you to do at your expense. As I said in my last video, keep calm and panic.